Hello everyone, I am Iryna Ignatenko, researcher of traditional Ukrainian folk culture, including stories of physicality and sexuality.
What is Ukrainian traditional society and Ukrainian traditional culture?
When Ukrainian ethnographers write or say, Ukrainian traditional society or Ukrainian traditional culture, they mean agrarian pre-industrial society until the beginning of the 20th century.
From what sources can we learn about how our ancestors loved?
First of all, we can find information about the history of Ukrainian sex in the so-called Soromyce folklore. This includes folk legends, tales, riddles, as well as a whole complex of philosophical and mythological ideas. In addition, researchers, ethnographers of the middle of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century conducted ethnographic records, surveys among the population, asking certain questions that we can now classify as follows, those that reveal this topic to us. Among the most outstanding and famous Ukrainian scientists, two should be mentioned, Volodymyr Hnatyuk and Fyodorov. Fyodorov, for example, in studies on Ukrainian ethnology and anthropology describes and analyzes in detail the Komora rite. It is a public test of the bride's virginity. He also publishes and tries to give an analysis of the Ukrainian Soromyce songs, which were associated with this rite, when young people were escorted to the first wedding night, to, in fact, the first such closeness.
Why do we need to know this?
In fact, this question is similar to the question, why do we need to know about history, about culture, about art? In addition to the fact that every person should understand his roots, this knowledge helps us understand who we are today. How we live, according to what rules, what norms of behavior do we use, why do we allow ourselves something, but do not allow something on the contrary? Because culture is durable, including the culture of sexuality.
Did sexual education exist in Ukrainian traditional society?
In Ukrainian traditional society, sexual education did not exist. It was a strictly closed and taboo topic. Parents did not talk about it with their children. Researchers interpret this as a possible fear of incest, as well as to some extent such moral education. It was believed among the people that teenagers, so to speak, will understand by themselves what and why. In particular, somewhere they will see something, and somewhere they will hear, or see in animals or the surrounding world. Since there was no sexual education in a traditional Ukrainian family, it could become a big problem for young people, especially for girls who went to evening parties, lost their virginity there, got pregnant, and did not fully understand why this happened.
How is sexuality reflected in Ukrainian folklore?
Ukrainian folklore, which is called Soromyce, quite vividly reflects various aspects of sexuality. In particular, we can learn about different types of sex, about how our ancestors called different parts of the body, including the genitals of both men and women, as various poses were called. Places and locations where our ancestors could and did have sex are also mentioned in detail. All this is played out in such a fun, humorous, light way. Absolutely no condemnation is felt, but on the contrary, it was shown to be normal and natural, and you can get pleasure and enjoyment from it. But there were certain limitations. The Ukrainian Soromyce folklore was performed only where it was appropriate, among adults, married people in particular, as a preparation for the wedding ceremony Komora, and in no case was it performed among young people, that is, there were certain age restrictions. Conventionally, Soromyce folklore is divided into two groups. The first is the use of so-called effeminisms, i.e., it is the replacement of a swear word that is not suitable for a completely used one, that is, with certain hints. For example, the male genital organ could be called a cucumber or a pepper or a spikelet. In the same way, Ukrainian Soromyce texts can have certain hints, a certain play on words, two-dimensionality. Adults can understand what it is about, but children who hear these words will not understand what it is all about. For example, girl, don't go into the field, there a bull will stab you with a long stamen, you won't be a girl anymore. That is, this is a song that was sung before the Camorra. For adults it is clear that soon the girl will expect sexual intercourse, defloration and so on. But if some child heard, then she might think that to some extent this is a warning. The girl is warned not to walk alone in the fields where bulls graze, which can attack her and stab her with their horns. Another group is, so to speak, where nothing is replaced by any words, that is, the so-called obscene vocabulary is used. Nothing is veiled, so it is desirable that children do not hear it. There is a bush in the garden, a hole under the mountain, and the grandfather fucks the woman so that the saliva flows. Behind the hill, the herd is grazing, and the man is fucking the woman whose cunt is shaking. The hen is clucking on the stove, and the boy is eating cunt. How can you not kiss her? She is my own mother. That is, everyone is born from a woman, and therefore there is nothing wrong with engaging in oral sex so that a man can please a woman. I understand what this is about. That is, it was not considered some kind of perversion. It can be assumed that it all came from individual needs and preferences, but folk culture did not impose a taboo on these types of sex.
What is sexuality?
Sexuality, or in folk culture it was also called tyarka, is masturbation. Actually, we know very, very little about the history of physiology in terms of self-pleasure. In fact, there are only isolated ethnographic records that reveal this rather intimate sphere of human pleasure. In particular, in the study of Mark Rushevsky and Zenon Kuzel, The Child in the Customs and Beliefs of the Ukrainian People, we find the following information. Sexuality or tyarka is also found in men and girls, but little material has been collected about it, because it is difficult to collect it. The authors write that this was also done by children. Even if a boy and a girl sexuality, or even girls with girls, they don't know how to eat themselves, and the children are already pushing. They climb on top of each other like pigs. This is Mariaka and Arkavrinka. It was a shame to see them near the house, they loved to play there, both would undress and crawl on top of each other. Shame became, and they ran away. And Lobuznenko sometimes knocks one of the children to the floor, lies down and laughs. Sometimes they hit him with a rag and reprimanded him, but he doesn't care what kind of behavior children have. There are children who play like that. But let them have fun, isn't it possible otherwise? It's okay, those who are older already understand everything and still do it. They are already shepherds, but they are still children. It means that masturbation could be collective, that is, when it was not a personal matter of self-pleasure, but when you could get together and masturbate, look at each other, or you can masturbate each other. By the way, there is very interesting information in this publication. Academician Zenon Kuzelia, a student of Mihailo Rushevsky, writes about it. This is what he writes. I myself saw in Berezany on the pasture how the shepherds of 6 to 12 years of age were having fun quite unashamedly. They called their work, making beer. Here it can be assumed that children got to know their body and their sexual needs through such practices, so some adults said that it was just a game, that is, they even treated and perceived it as normal. That is, they looked at each other, touched each other or themselves, and it was such a certain game, entertainment and self-discovery, that is, we can make an assumption that the Ukrainian traditional peasant culture treated many aspects of physicality and sexuality much more calmly, simpler and less taboo, as you and I are used to thinking about it.
What is a game of Pertula?
Pertula, or as it was also called, to soak the end, was considered such a game between the guy and the girl, when the guy introduced his penis, actually the head, pushing it a little into the girl's vagina. What exactly for? In order to satisfy oneself in this way, to play, but not to deprive the girl of her virginity, which was very much valued in Ukrainian traditional society. Of course, such games were extremely dangerous for girls, so they started playing in love and with good intentions, and quite often it ended with a full-fledged sexual act. But, from the materials we have, we can assume that the girls who got pregnant did not understand how they could get pregnant and why, if they only played Pertula?
How widespread was the practice of premarital sex and living by faith?
In Ukrainian traditional society, extramarital sex was subject to strict taboos. In fact, marriage legalized intimate relationships. Violators were threatened with punishment. In particular, if a girl led an intimate life and became pregnant, then, accordingly, she passed into such a social status as pokrytka. Pokrytka is a socially undesirable isolated person who was actually considered a prostitute, and society's attitude towards her was extremely negative. On boys or on a boy who had such a bad reputation to some extent, he seduces girls, certain punishing sanctions of society could be imposed on him, even beaten or humiliated in some way, although there is a very well-known Ukrainian saying that sounds like this: there is no mark on a Cossack. The proverb means that physiologically a man cannot get pregnant. That is, it is not visible from his appearance, whether he is having sex or not, so it was easier for men and boys to circumvent this prohibition, to have sex outside of marriage. People in Ukrainian traditional society could live by faith, live unmarried, but only if they had already had official marriages for one reason or another. They could not divorce, or could not marry a second or third time, or fourth. Because divorce was a very long process that required the approval of the church and required both time and money, so sometimes the peasants simply separated, gave their official bride a letter of discharge, and started living with other people. Of course, the state and the church did not approve of this. It controlled and also punished it. In particular, the children who appeared in this civil marriage could not claim the property of their biological father. Because he was not socially considered a father, and therefore there were various factors that to some extent deterred people from having sex outside of marriage. That is, both economic, social, and religious, because such cohabitation was regarded as fornication, satisfying one's selfish needs and ignoring some obligations to society, for example, and so on.
What was the attitude towards pokrytic and illegitimate children?
The attitude towards pokrytic in Ukrainian traditional society was extremely negative. Who is pokrytka? Pokrytka is a girl who lost her virginity and gave birth to a child out of wedlock. In Ukrainian traditional society, there was a clear belief that every person must go through certain stages of his life scenario. Among them, marriage was considered a mandatory stage. Pokrytka became a woman and a mother out of wedlock. On the one hand, the necessary rites were not performed on her. On the other hand, she gave birth to a child in fornication, i.e., not in an official marriage. Accordingly, she was considered a transgressor, as one who transgressed norms of morality. Accordingly, she should be punished for this. In what way? Well, of course, to some extent this is defamation, this is contempt, this is mockery, this is to some extent being in a marginal status, when she was not invited together with other women to perform rituals that were very important in Ukrainian society. For example, baking bread, i.e., performing unifying functions, when the whole community or a part of the community, in particular the women's part, were together, sang together, cooked something together. On the other hand, pokraki were outcasts. Of course, girls who lost their virginity before marriage, and most importantly, who became pregnant, perfectly understood what prospect of a crippled fate awaited them and their child, because such a child was called a bastard. This became grounds for mocking this child, the fact that she has a father unknown. This child could be abused by other children when they were growing up, adults. The child had no parental protection, and even in the metric books in the church it was written that there is only the mother, the father is unknown. So, fully understanding the fate that awaits her and her child, some girls being in psychological and emotional stress after giving birth, especially postpartum syndrome, unfortunately there are cases recorded in court archival cases, in folklore, and in records ethnographic. Mothers resorted to killing their newborn babies, sometimes in a very cruel way. They could throw them into a well, drown them in a river, bury them in the ground, and so on. It is necessary to understand and not transfer all the blame to inexperienced girls, young women, because of the feeling of dishonor and powerlessness, and the feeling of guilt could provoke such criminal and serious violations.
What was the attitude towards homosexuality?
The topic of same-sex relationships, their existence and practice, in general, everything related to them, was the most closed topic on which the taboo lay. Why? How do we know about Ukrainian society? Mainly from sources. Ethnography, a science that appeared in the middle of the 19th century, almost does not use such materials. That is, ethnographers of that time did not record, and did not ask people about this or about intimate relationships between representatives of the same sex. But knowing how Ukrainian traditional society functioned and by what rules it was lived, it can be assumed that these were, if they were, very, very isolated practices. Why? Because young children and teenagers have already been set up for mandatory heterosexual marriage. That is, marriage was considered mandatory. Children understood from an early age that a boy should choose a girl who would become his wife, and a girl understood that she should choose a boy to start a family with. Since childhood, only one correct scenario has been built for children. When children grew up, became teenagers, got married, created families, it can be assumed that there is an innate sexual need to have intimate relationships, closeness with a member of their own sex. Perhaps realizing, or, for example, somewhere on a meadow, their men half-naked mow the grass or other similar things, and then, perhaps, certain sympathies arose, or some urges to intimacy. It could also happen to women, but due to the suppression of feelings, which had an impact on the unawareness of what is happening to them, what they feel and want, especially when a person already had a family and children, played a decisive role. Because we also know about bisexuality, that is, about the desire and opportunity to realize your sexual desires and needs with representatives of both sexes. That is, this ignorance, failure to speak up, Lack of awareness and the clear heterosexual direction of Ukrainian traditional society probably did not give the opportunity to reach real homosexual practices. Even if you are aware of your needs and desires, for them you need a partner who feels the same way and they also strive for it. Therefore, Ukrainian ethnography, Ukrainian sources, Ukrainian folklore are silent on this matter. They do not have specific records, but it can be assumed that the cases, if there were very few and hidden, and perhaps even remained at the level of something subconscious, which was simply suppressed, and never did not come to real attempts to practice. Thank you for your attention. See you next time.